You are now tuned in to The Daily Dose, a daily podcast produced by the Minority Cannabis Business Association, focused on trending headlines in the cannabis industry and how they will affect minority entrepreneurs who are risking it all to make the jump from the legacy market into the regulated cannabis industry. If you support an equitable cannabis industry, then you're an ally of MCBA, and we want you to join the movement for a better tomorrow. Now sit back and relax. We've got your Daily Dose loading up. Special shout out to this month's sponsor of the show, Indiva Advisors. You can check them out at indivaadvisors.com. They are a leading accounting firm dedicated to the cannabis industry. They navigate complex tax, financial, and regulatory changes to make sure that your business is compliant and efficient. They focus on you so you can focus on your business. You can check them out at indivaadvisors.com. That's INDIVA advisors.com. Now we'll get right into today's headlines and today's Daily Dose. Aloha, what up, everybody? Welcome back to another Daily Dose. I'm your host, Kaliko Castillo, president of the board here at the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Really excited to be joined, as always, by my co-host here, our awesome communications manager here at MCBA, Precious. What's good, Precious? How you doing? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our 25th episode of The Daily Dose.
What up? What up? We are today covering a story out of New York. It obviously feels like we've been covering a lot of stories out of New York recently, but it is one of the biggest markets now opening up. But an article from the end of last week from MJBiz Daily, New York's $200 million marijuana social equity fund still awaiting capital. This was done by Chris Roberts, once again at Marijuana Business Daily, reading directly from the headlines here. A first of its kind $200 million social equity fund in New York that's been promised to qualified marijuana entrepreneurs is still awaiting its first investment that would help bankroll the effort, fund managers told MJBiz Daily. So under the state's Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, the first 150 adult use cannabis retail licenses are reserved for nonprofits and justice-involved social equity applicants. Obviously, we've talked about this on other episodes of the Daily Dose. In addition to these turnkey dispensaries, which we've talked about, the state also pledged to contribute $50 million to a social equity fund, with the remaining $150 million coming from private investors. However, despite a September 1st, 2022 deadline to secure capital commitments, the state hasn't yet secured funding. Ruben McDaniel III, DAS NY's president and CEO, told MJBiz Daily. He says, "We have a great investor base. We're negotiating our final terms," he added. "We just haven't had our final close yet." So once again, we're covering this headline because we're now 4 months past the initial deadline of September 1st, where they were supposed to have these commitments in place and have money. We have stores that are now opening, at least soft launching, right? We've talked about Housing Works. We've talked about Smacked, right? Now, two of those first of the 150 licensees are now starting to get into this process, but yet there's no money actually from the private side, right? The state probably, I don't know if the state actually has their $50 million in the fund. I would assume that they do, but most of that fund, $150 million, is not yet being contributed by private investors. So I think this is something we definitely wanted to highlight, because for me, is one of the things I was talking about, is this is another great example of really great intentions, having this fund available for entrepreneurs and for social equity applicants, but a really great example of not great execution, right? The fact that you are now 4 months removed from the initial statutory deadline, and we still do not have funds available for these entrepreneurs who are trying to get open, and now what's going to become one of the largest markets in the country. So I wanted to kick it over to you, Precious, for your feedback. You're obviously somebody who has raised money for their own business, so you understand what it's like to try to get the dollars in to actually open a business. What do you think this is actually going to do for a lot of these social equity entrepreneurs who are just waiting not only to get their license, but obviously to get the funds to actually make this stuff possible?
Honestly, it just stalls the process. There are actual several car license holders who are awaiting funding from the state in order to move forward or to figure out how they'll be able to, open their businesses with some sort of financial investment, whether that's them seeking out their own investment privately, or again, the fund that is supposed to hence stand up these businesses. And like you said, the idea was there. It was very much lofty. It definitely served the purpose of things we mentioned in our report that called out states that didn't provide initial funding for social equity applicants, rather waited for funding to come from cannabis sales after large operators had had their time and stake to then build a funding program from that. And honestly, I'm not surprised, because if you look at the state of cannabis financially, when you look at the investment markets when it comes to cannabis, it's all pretty rattled right now. There's something lurking in the waters, and I think a lot of this has to do with safe not being passed and not, serving those guarantees to investors and to banks and to so many other individuals that had stakes in the game. Where now you're looking back at just complete risk capital in the cannabis industry. And then if you're, looking at projections and data and analyzing the state of the industry, you'll notice that the West Coast is struggling right now due to many several issues, completed from oversaturation of licenses to limited funding to high taxes to excessive product. So investors are losing money by the boatload, honestly, if you're looking deeply into the cannabis financial state. So you'll look to the east. You'll look at New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, Maryland, all these states that are coming online. These would seem like highly investable areas. And essentially, what New York set up this $200 million fund for was to provide that funding first, so that you don't actually end up, especially social equity applicants, in predatory deals, because now your back is against the wall because you need funding to launch your business, to get the license, and so on and so forth. But even investors looking into this fund, New York has created a great program, but also made it very restrictive for large companies. Most large investors that are doing $5 to $10 million deals are looking to make sure their returns are there. And it's usually verified by having larger operations, MSOs or whatever, that you're banking on being able to, return on their original investment. And New York regulations made it so that these larger corporations are going to have a hard time coming in, at least well after, again, the social justice impacted folks are stood up, which is what we want and what we want to see anyway. But I believe that's why there's that inconsistency with the fund. Because now you got to look at it from an investor standpoint. How are they sure that they're going to see this return that New York is promising, or whatever deals they're making for this fund? And then, like you mentioned, the $50 million, if it's there already, we don't know it. If it's coming just straight from the state's budget, if it's already being allocated again. And all this does is that it's impacting these social equity applicants, because there are card license holders who are currently waiting on funding. They're waiting on DASNY to provide them the location. So all these things that New York has promised, people are essentially sitting there waiting for it. So just like the article said, what's going to happen next is really out of our control. But I want folks to really think about all the other aspects of cannabis that are the smaller micro events that are happening that are now trickling into just the investment space and cannabis alone.
I think those are some really great points. As you mentioned, sort of like the post-safe landscape for folks and for investors who maybe were a little bit more bullish over the last few years, where it felt like we were building all this momentum, New Jersey, New York, all these states coming online. Then you hit the sort of congressional roadblock of safe banking not passing. So now you have a lot of sort of like big institutional money and, VCs and other folks who have been thinking about wanting to get in or been a little bit more bullish now starting to pull back a little bit and think, oh, do I want to invest my dollars here? Am I going to see a return, right? There's always the macroeconomic picture everybody's talking about around inflation, recession, all this other sort of stuff. So there are a lot of issues at play about whether investors want to be putting their money into this industry. But I also just think it really kind of raises a really interesting sort of discussion around like, what was this industry like before the investors got in, right? Like there was a time period when legalization first sort of hit and you had some investors in, but most investors were staying away from it, right? And you had a lot of entrepreneurs who had to turn to friends and family, had to turn to be able to fund things themselves, but the industry is a lot different there. It's cheaper to get in, easier to sort of be able to clear the hurdles you had to get into to be a legal entrepreneur. Now it takes a lot more dollars, right? It's a lot harder for folks to go to friends and family, raise a couple mil to get everything they need to do to get up and running, right? So I do think it's really interesting now that we're in this place where it seems like investors might be getting a little bit more scared about putting dollars in, but more than ever, it's more expensive to get started. So people actually do depend on those dollars to get going. So I don't know. One thing I guess I would say is like I wish I had hundreds of millions of dollars or millions of dollars to throw around as a VC, because it seems like it would be a no-brainer to fund this fund, right? It seems like one VC firm at a large scale could come in and fund this entire thing themselves if they wanted to, right? And then put them some sort of in a kingmaker position for a lot of these first time entrepreneurs who are coming out here and getting the first crack at it. So I feel like I understand in some ways like why risk capital is a little bit more scared right now, but at the same time, like these are the first 150 licenses to get up in the state of New York. Like if you can't make money on these and you can't see a long-term profitability off of your fund, then yeah, this is probably not the industry to be in general. But like I have no doubt that these folks, given all of the things that New York really was intentional about setting up, like Dasney being able to provide real estate access, like trying to set up this $200 million fund. They did do the work to make sure that these people can be successful, but now clearly there's some execution that is lacking on the backside of that.
Yeah, and I'm not doubting New York. I definitely think they'll be able to see all of it through, all everything they've mentioned in the beginning to, get the fund moving, get educational resources out there, provide turnkey real estate for folks to be able to open. Again, I think it just all comes to timing. The timing was probably just what was a bit skewed. And again, that timing then stalls a lot of other license holders who are literally signing contingency deals too, like contingent on this happening and this happening, then this can happen for me. And we all know those are how many deals are made in cannabis because again, you're looking at really risk capital when it comes to whether or not you're even licensed in the area you want to be. So yeah, and then you have Chris Webber and his folks that are going to be running the fund. There's just so many questions around that too, being that he has entities within cannabis in Michigan and elsewhere. I know that was kind of cleared up before. I remember Chris Webber and Mr. Wild had started a fund not too long ago to support social equity, just people of color entering the industry. I think now they pivoted to just focusing on New York and being able, like you said, to be that entity that that is funding these operations. So I'm also interested to see how that relationship is going to build out for the city. There hasn't been much talk outside of just the announcement that this is who's managing the fund. And I do think that they're kind of it points for some more transparency. Like, we should have some more talking points coming out of Chris Webber and his team and just explaining what the processes are, what they're doing right now to keep momentum going and so on and so forth. I think that'll ease the waters, because if not, you're just going to get a whole bunch of more skeptical think pieces about what is actually happening when the OCM can pretty much just provide us that information.
For sure. We definitely have more questions than answers at this stage in the game. And I know you have been someone who's mentioned several times that like the timing of this sort of timeline has always been a little skewed, that it always was a little bit more compressed than probably was realistic. It has people having unfair and unreasonable expectations that are then clearly not being met. So you have a lot of people that are being upset. And like you said, signing contingency plans, putting money on the line, paying out like rent while they're waiting on stuff. So there's a lot of things that ends up sort of rippling out. So I do think it's interesting watching New York do this when they tried to do it in a very slow, methodical sort of way, still hitting roadblocks and speed bumps like anybody else would. But I think it does go to show that it's less about how quickly you get it done and more importantly that you get it done right. Right. You really do only get one shot to set up these markets. It's more important that you get it done the right way and that you're thoughtful and methodical and properly executing on your plan rather than setting unrealistic timeframes that you're not going to meet and then ultimately going to do things half-assed and not really fully measure up to what it is that you're promising. So
Okay.
hopefully we'll be able to see some movement here soon, both around the transparency and about sort of funds actually coming in here. We obviously will continue to cover this story as it unfolds in New York for the first sort of 150 social equity operators who are getting involved. But we appreciate you guys tuning into another episode of Daily Dose. We want to make sure that you guys are following along on our podcast page, on our YouTube channel, on our LinkedIn, which we go live on every time we go live here. Make sure you're following along. I know we got another small business education series happening this month. What's the topic we're covering, Precious?
Yes, we are discussing new markets actually and new opportunities. So if you're interested in Maryland, Missouri, Connecticut, New York, we're just going to be breaking down some of those regulations, discussing what those markets mean for just the general state of the cannabis industry. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're at the very beginning of your state writing its regulations, what you can be doing to, just shore up your chances of being an operator in that state.
Yeah, excellent. Very much looking forward to that. Definitely good timing on that webinar. We're really excited about all the programming we got working on this year. For those who maybe didn't catch it on a previous episode, we just elected 6 new board members that are being sat at our first board meeting this month. So we got a lot of exciting stuff coming out. We're looking for new members all the time, right? Trying to grow the association. So if you're in the industry, you believe in an equitable cannabis industry and an equitable future, make sure you're going to minoritycannabis.org and signing up as a member. I know the content we're putting out here on social is working. We've had some people sign up as members over the last couple of weeks after watching one of our episodes or seeing us post on LinkedIn. So very much want to make sure that you guys know that this is a membership focused organization. We do a lot of great work around advocacy and policy, but ultimately it's only funded by our members. So make sure you're going to minoritycannabis.org, signing up as a member. Appreciate you guys listening into the podcast and following along here live on LinkedIn. Until next time, my name is Kaliko Castillo, president of the board, and for my co-host Precious, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Aloha.